Go inside the Crimson Tide with your hosts Rodney Orr and Gary Harris, keeping you informed on everything Alabama. Tider Insider TV, brought to you by Tuscaloosa Tourism and Sports.
And good evening, everybody, and welcome into this edition of Tider Insider TV alongside Rodney Orr from TiderInsider.com. I'm WVUA 23 Sports Director Gary Harris. And Rodney, I can't help it. It feels strange sitting up here the day after a college football playoff national championship and not having Alabama involved. It's just not the norm. This was only the second time in the college football playoff era that Alabama was not a part of it. And, of course, last year, even though they lost in Indianapolis, they played Georgia for the national championship. But last night, it was the Bulldogs really making a statement, finishing with the largest margin of victory, not just in championship game history, in bowl history, Rodney. Stetson Bennett, sometimes you just got to admit it. I was wrong about the guy. I'm not going to lie to you. I thought he was a placeholder. Even after they won the national championship last year, I said, you know what? Even if he does come back, he's more than that. I mean, the guy counted for 6 touchdowns last night, Ronnie. Ran for 2, threw for 4, 65-7. They outgained them by well over 400 yards. Before we get to how this impacts Alabama, I just want to get your reaction to what Georgia was able to do last night. They absolutely annihilated a team that made it to the college football playoff national championship game.
Listen, first of all, don't be so hard on yourself on Stetson Bennett because he got a lot better. He developed over the last few years into a really, really good college football player. Now, look, I know the TCU staff. I know some people on close to that program, and they felt like he was kind of the Baker Mayfield from 2017 at Oklahoma. They had a lot of respect for him. This is a really good, Georgia. Look, I don't think it was a great year for college football. I think it was down. I think a lot of teams. Georgia was the best. It was clearly the best team. How strong, how physical they are up front, Gary. I think that's really the big difference with Georgia. They've got that mindset, that winning mentality. This looked like Bama of old.
Yeah, it did. And I said on my 5 o'clock sports that, people are asking, have they supplanted Alabama? The easy answer for right now is yes. But let's keep in mind, Rodney, and you reminded me of this. You might not remember it on a conversation that we had. First of all, college football is fluid. It's year to year. Georgia's on top right now, but it was just 4 years ago when a lot of people were saying Clemson had supplanted Alabama. Yeah, sure. Now Clemson is, going to probably not even be picked in the top 10 next year. Does Alabama need to come back in 2023 and win the national championship? Well, they certainly need to win it if they can, and they don't need to see Georgia win it. Because if we're sitting here next year and Georgia goes 3 in a row, then there's going to be no denying that they're a dynasty, and they've done something that hasn't been done. But all Alabama has to do, and I say that all, it's not easy, Rod, but next year's a brand new year. And these teams are not going to be the same. So while at the moment Georgia's on top, 4 years ago when I left Santa Clara, California, Clemson was on top. And then you know what happened? 2 years later, Alabama won the national championship. They played for it last year. So it's not like they've fallen off the map by any means.
No, not at all. Look, I think what we kind of saw in the Ole Miss game was Alabama starting to get back to that physical run game. I think they have to become more effective running the ball. They have to become more physical on both sides of the ball. I say that. It's a line of scrimmage game.
It is.
If you want to beat Georgia, you're going to have to beat them up front. That's where I think Alabama has slipped on both sides of the ball. So I think that's something that's a focus. I think you can see what Nick Saban's been doing the last 4 or 5 games down the stretch of the season. They're kind of getting back to that. I think that's the direction they'll be headed in the offseason. Alabama's got a lot of holes to fill next year, losing a lot of guys on defense. They've got a new quarterback they have to break in. So there's a lot of question marks about this Alabama team as they head into 2023.
All right, as we said, it is what it is. You have to give the dog is due, pardon the pun. Georgia, what they've done under Kirby Smart is very impressive. Now, there's giving credit, and then there's giving credit and somewhat, and I didn't hear it myself. I did hear someone on television say that David Pollock said this morning on television that he wasn't trying to be disrespectful of Nick Saban. But with Nick Saban sitting right next to him, and he had an opportunity on Twitter to walk it back a little bit, and he didn't. He just retweeted, what did I say that was untrue? But this is the former Georgia player who is an ESPN analyst who doesn't hide his fandom. None of the Georgia analysts seem to, other than Matt Stinchcomb, who I think is incredibly professional. But David Pollock saying with Nick Saban right next to him, arguably the greatest coach in college football history, that basically Georgia is the team now. Here, let's play this from ESPN last night.
And Georgia, obviously, you've seen in the past couple seasons now, really, they've taken hold of college football. They did an unbelievable job. This is a young football team. This isn't an old football team with a bunch of guys losing.
All right, Ronnie, again, you know, what he said is probably true, but context is important. And when you're sitting next to Nick Saban, all I know is if I'm sitting next to Nick Saban and I make a comment like that, I'm going to at least acknowledge. But I'm going to say that, but Coach, we understand Alabama's been in this position before they've come back. Or on Twitter when somebody retweets it and says, you know, here's David Pollock in the GOAT's face, then I'm going to come back and say no disrespect meant to Nick Saban. He didn't do that on social media. So to me, it's one thing to pay a compliment. I thought it was kind of a backhanded slap in the face to Nick Saban. That's my take on it.
You know, that's the first time I watched that. I really, to me, and I respect what you say, I wasn't really offended by what I just saw.
Okay.
You know, I didn't think it was as harsh as maybe some others have played it out to be, what I expected it to be. But here's what I am glad. I'm glad he said it, because I think Nick Saban obviously is highly motivated. But I think that's something that continues to light a fire. That will, when you go in the offseason, that's something people are going to be talking about. And that's what's going to be said inside that football complex over there at 323 Bryant Drive. I think they're going to talk about, hey, you know what? Georgia's taking what belongs to us. Now we got to get it back.
I agree, Ryan. I'm certainly not offended. I'm not saying that he's wrong, but I do think when you're sitting next to Nick Saban and you're basically saying your former assistant has surpassed you, they've lapped you, you're secondary now. I would have just at least acknowledged that, hey, we've seen Alabama in this position before, they've come back, so never count out Alabama. Not that he had to do that. I just think, again, you are sitting next to Nick Saban. But listen, Alabama's got to do something about it. I mean, if you don't like where you're at, like you said, you can answer the bell. And next year is going to be next football season, it's going to be a huge season for Alabama. Keep in mind that since Nick Saban got to Alabama in 2007, Alabama's never gone more than 3 seasons without a national championship. They won it in 9, they won it in 11, they won it in 12, they won it in 15, they won it in 17, and they won it in 20. Next year will be the 3rd year without one. If they don't win it, that'll be the first time that's ever happened. So, you know, those are facts. That's how often he's won it. Rodney, the odds to win the national championship, I got to tell you this. Georgia is number 1, plus 375 according to Caesars Sportsbook in Las Vegas, but Alabama is second at plus 550, followed by Ohio State, Southern Cal, LSU, and Michigan. So it's not like Alabama's out of the picture.
Listen, I don't think there's a lot of difference between these teams. Again, I think Georgia was the best team, but Gary, I think there's a minimal amount of difference. I think certainly Alabama can make up the gap.
All right, you mentioned the defensive line, and listen, we didn't talk much about this because it was kind of quiet. Justin Eboigbe, a veteran defensive lineman, a really good player, he didn't play much this year. And after he went out, we never really heard an explanation. I don't know if it was vertigo, if it was concussion issues or whatever, but he announced today that he's going to run it back. I don't think he feels like he's in a really good position to go into the draft right now after having hardly played this year. But this is big for Alabama, particularly with Byron Young leaving, to get a veteran interior defensive lineman who I think started at least 2 seasons, maybe 3, to come back on that defense. That's big.
It's real big because, listen, he was playing really well before he went down. When he came in as a true freshman, I thought Justin Eboigbe was going to be a difference maker up front. He started really well, but he hurt a foot early in his career, and he's never really quite gotten up to what I think Justin Eboigbe can be, and I think he was touching that this year before he went down with the injury. So to get a big defensive lineman, they need defensive linemen, and to get him back is big.
Yeah, it was called a neck injury, and that's really all we ever got on it, but yeah, it is big to get him back. I mean, he's a really good player. All right, Ronnie, every year is different, but speaking of that defense, obviously interior defensive lineman, you're losing DJ Dill, you're losing Byron Young. On the outside, you're losing Will Anderson Jr., you're losing some linebackers, Henry T., Jalen Moody, a lot of guys on the back end. But let's focus on the defensive line because that's, as you said, it's still a line of scrimmage game, and Georgia's proving that. Let's talk about who's coming back. With Eboigbe coming back, you've got Jaheim Otis, Tim Smith, Jamil Burroughs, Damon Payne Jr., Jamarian Latham. There are others. There's a lot of freshmen coming in. This is an area, defensive line play, where Alabama's got to get better. They just, in my opinion, haven't lived up to the standard that was set around here in the first 10 or 12 years that Nick Saban was here.
No, I would agree. And I think when you look at the group that you mentioned, certainly they're going to be the core guys. I think, obviously, you have some freshmen coming in, James Smith being one of those, obviously, who perhaps could contribute early. We'll see. But You're right. I mean, I think, again, go back to what we said earlier. Alabama's got to get back to where they're dominating the line of scrimmage. And I think defensively, we've seen spurts at times. We've seen them play well at times. But the consistency up front hasn't been there. And I think, too, not only that, I think inside backer, I think that's another area where we need to see Alabama kind of get back to where they used to be.
Yeah, there's nothing that affects the quarterback. I know the edge rushers are great, but good quarterbacks can step up in the pocket. But when pressure is pushed on the inside, interior pressure, it's hard for a quarterback to get away. That is a huge part of playing good defense. All right, still to come on Tighter Insider Television. Alabama women's basketball keeps its streak of dominance alive against its in-state rival. That's coming up. And the men's basketball team is on a roll, too. They're back in the top 5 of the national polls, and they wore out Kentucky. Now, though, tomorrow night could be their biggest test of the season to date when they head to Arkansas. We'll explain why next. And a little bit later on, we'll be getting your phone calls, your emails, and your tweets. As always, the phone number 205-348-WVUA. That's 348-9882. You can email us, TITV@WVUA23.com. We'll come back with the show that takes you inside the Crimson Tide, the award-winning Tighter Insider TV. We'll return after this. And we're back on TITV, brought to you by Tuscaloosa Tourism and Sports. They do great work for our community. Alongside Rodney Orr, I'm Gary Harris. Well, this past Saturday afternoon, Crimson Tide, boy, did they play great against Kentucky. Outstanding defensive performance. They held the Wildcats to a season low in scoring and absolutely dominated the game. And Rodney, people probably get tired of hearing me make this analogy, but I was there. When Kentucky comes to your arena, it's like when Alabama comes to play football against you. There's a different level of energy in the building. And I know this is not right now it looks like a great Kentucky team, but still, 78-52. They led by as many as 31. They dominated the game. They absolutely took Sheba out of the game. He had 4 points and 6 rebounds. Amazing performance. What impressed you most?
I tell you, Gary, again, I go back to the balance they have. Obviously, Brandon Miller. 19 points, had a big game. Just the balance that they had, the energy they're playing with. It's the consistency, the chemistry. All of those things I think are very impressive with this team because, look, right now, we haven't seen this team have – they've been playing even keel. There's not a lot of highs and some lows. And I think this team is playing with even keel, just a lot of consistency. That's really impressive, especially when you consider the youth. Yeah,
what's in store for Alabama now, though, and we'll talk more about it after Coach Talk, could be the toughest game of the season today. And we are going to discuss that more on Coach Talk. Alabama dominated Kentucky, but head coach Nate Oates understands in this league, you're always turning it over. And next up, a road game in Fayetteville against, it's early, but this is going to be a desperate Arkansas team. Here's Coach Oates.
And it's going to be a tough road environment. Last time we played there, I think the free throw discrepancy was one of the biggest in like 20 years in the SEC or something. I think it was, 43-8, if I remember right. They had 43 attempts, we had 8. So we're going to have to expect a tough road environment. We're going to have to play through some stuff.
Rod, they are. And here's the deal. Arkansas, just like Alabama, has Final Four aspirations. I know they've been without Nick Smith, but they don't want to go to 1-3 in the league. And listen, they didn't just get beat. They got embarrassed at Auburn. And Musselman, the head coach, came out and said it. Tomorrow night, this atmosphere that Alabama's going to play in is going to be very similar to what Kentucky had to play in against Alabama on Saturday. It's going to be crazy up there. They're going to be desperate. I think this will show the maturity of this team. We know Alabama's good, but are they good enough and mature enough to go into this hostile environment and win the game?
I think that's a great question. Certainly that's going to be the thing that everyone's going to be focused on, at least on this end, is, can this young team go up there and play with the kind of consistency they've shown? And if they do, Gary, that's good news. That's a good sign. But as you mentioned, going to be a real difficult challenge and certainly something to keep an eye on.
Yeah, and Alabama's probably not going to win all the SEC games. And tomorrow night, it could be a loss. But how they play, I think, is what I'm looking for most. Sure, you want to win the game, but play with poise. Like Coach said, Arkansas gets to the free throw line a lot in that building, and see if you can play through the runs that Arkansas will make. And if you do, maybe you have a chance to win it at the end. All right, on Sunday afternoon down at Neville Arena in Auburn, Alabama women's basketball. Boy, we talked about the beatdown of Kentucky by the men. How about this? On the road, 88-57 over Auburn.
Yeah.
That's 8 in a row for Christy Curry in Alabama over the Auburn Tigers. So, Alabama, she's slowly built this program. They're a very good program. They're still not what I would call at championship caliber level. But one thing you want to do when you're at Alabama is beat your in-state rival. And by gosh, she's doing that.
Wow. Yeah, that's quite a domination there, Gary. And you're right. I mean, the improvement showing there and dominating them is something that I know one thing. I know it makes you real happy.
Well, hell, it makes a lot of Alabama fans happy. And this women's team for Alabama, they're good. And, we'll see what they can do later on if they can get back in the NCAA tournament. All right, when we come back, it's time to get phone calls and emails. Here's the phone number again, 205-348-9882. Let us hear from you, Tider Insider Nation. We'll be right back. More TITV after this. The voice of the Crimson Tide football program, Eli Gold, announced this past week that he has cancer. Gold missed the entire 2022 college football season as he dealt with a health concern. Gold said in a statement released by the Crimson Tide Sports Network that he is battling a treatable form of cancer. He went on to say, "I want to thank everyone for their well wishes and prayers. After extensive testing, I have now been diagnosed with a treatable form of cancer. I'm already making progress and hope to get back behind the mic again soon. Roll Tide." Gold announced before the football season that he would step away from the role temporarily as he managed his health issues. Chris Stewart filled in that spot for the Crimson Tide during the 2022 football season. And I know everybody that's an Alabama fan, and don't have to be an Alabama fan, praying for Eli, not just to get well, but to return to his spot there in the press box.
Certainly.
Miss him.
I've been listening to Eli Gold since, 79, when he used to do Calling All Sports. Long time.
He's a legend, no doubt about it. All right, let's get to the phone calls, and we're stacked up tonight, Rod. Little Kenny over in Havana is going to lead us off, and I'm not talking about Cuba. Hey, Little Kenny, how are you?
Hey, guys, I sure appreciate y'all taking my call. And I want to say how I enjoy your show. It's one of the highlights of my week, and I just appreciate it. Now, there were certain things that I noticed last night on the ball game, and one of the things I noticed is Kirk Herbstreit needs to buy another suit of clothes that's 2 or 3 times the size is bigger than what he's got. I don't see how he could take a breath. Now, secondly, Coach Saban is the dean of college football. Mm-hmm. And when he talks, you've got to listen. However, during the selection of the teams for the national playoffs, Coach Saban made a point to put the best teams in there to play the games. Well, we didn't see anything last night. That was a boring game. And finally, I think that the number of penalties Alabama suffered during the Tennessee game, being 17, I think that hurt their reputation on the national level.
Kenny, let's take a few of these. First of all, Coach Saban made his case for Alabama. Alabama's a better football team than TCU. I think we all would agree on that. They didn't get in, so you just have to move on. As far as the penalties, you're doggone right. That not only did it cost Alabama that game, but I do think this year Alabama got tagged as being undisciplined, and that's got to drive Coach Saban crazy.
Absolutely. I mean, that game, you saw it in the Texas game as well. They had some key penalties. It really, Gary, some of the most crucial points in the game. So, that's something that's not Alabama.
All right, let's get to Tommy and Romulus, and we got to pick it up a little bit. Hey, Tommy, what's going on, man?
Hey, guys, how y'all tonight?
Doing well.
Quick prayer for Eli. So glad he's doing better. Alabama fan, you just have to give Georgia credit for winning.
Tommy, you do. I'm with you. Listen, sometimes you just don't win the national championship. It's just, Alabama's won so many of them since Saban got here. You're not going to win it every year. So I like that perspective. Sometimes you just don't win it.
Yeah. I think right now, it's an opportunity for Alabama to kind of restart, reload, whatever you want to call it, and you can do that, and that's the good thing.
All right, we'll be back with more TITV right after this. And welcome back to TITV. A lot of good viewer reaction tonight. Let's get to our email of the day, and it's brought to you by KDM Service Corporation, serving your family like our family. If there are going to be coaching changes on the football team, when should we expect those to be announced? Dennis in Tuscaloosa. Rodney, take that one.
Well, listen, we're on Saban time. I mean, he's going to announce it like he always does. I didn't expect anything by now, but certainly, Gary, you would think if they're going to make changes, whether it's coordinators, whatever it might be, or guys leaving, it's probably going to all happen before February 1st. I would think maybe within the next week.
Yeah, of course, Charles Kelly has left to take over as the defensive coordinator for Coach Prime in Colorado. All right, let's get to Rusty in Demopolis on the phone. Hey, Rusty, how are you, man? Rusty, you with us? Rusty not there. Do you think Georgia's success is due to players' level of commitment to the program? Yeah, I do, Rusty. But I think Alabama's got commitment to the program, too. I mean, when you look at Alabama not being in the playoff and not having any opt-outs, so I think both these programs have a level of commitment, not only talent and coaching, but you have to have players that are bought in. I don't think that's an issue. I think it was a positive for Alabama, but I certainly don't think it's an issue at Alabama.
You know, I think you hit on something really strong with the buy-in in terms of the culture. I don't think we can say enough about what we saw with Bryce Young and Will Anderson playing in this game, and not only them, some of the other guys. Well, it's DeMarco Hellams, Jordan Battle, other guys. I think that tells you a lot about the program.
All right, thanks for the phone calls and the emails, and we'll be back to wrap up this edition of TITV here in Tuscaloosa right after this. All right, Ronnie, really neat. Josh Jacobs wins the NFL rushing title this year with 1,653 yards. You know who was second? Derrick Henry. Yeah. So Jacobs joins King Henry, and Alexander the Great as former Alabama running backs to win the rushing title. And Jacobs and Henry become the first backs since, I want to say it was it McGahee and Clinton Portis? It was somebody from Miami back around 2007 that did it. So great for them. All right, as we come back on camera, we want to offer our condolences to the friends and former teammates and family members of Ahmad Galloway, former Alabama running back who has passed away at the age of 42. You and I both covered him. Class act on the field and off the field, a good football player.
Yeah, I mean, it just seems like he was from Arlington, Tennessee. I remember interviewing him when he was a prospect. Great guy.
That's going to do it. Replay tonight at 10:30. Find us anytime at WVUA23.com. Good night.